Grad School 101 with Dr. Bradbury.
Hi, this is Dr. Bradbury. Welcome back to another edition of Grad School 101. Today we're going to talk about how to write a fantastic personal statement for graduate school, which I think is one of the more anxiety-provoking pieces for students of getting their applications together. So today we're going to talk about writing your personal statement, both from the perspective of writing a personal statement for clinical psychology doctoral programs specifically, and then also we'll make some comments about what your personal statement needs to look like if you're writing to master's programs that are in mental health related fields. So know that first off the bat, you may already have seen our introductory episode of Grad School 101 that just introduces you to the different elements of an application. And of course, the personal statement is discussed a little bit there. But just to let you know, one of the important things about a personal statement is that it's actually not supposed to be too personal. So one of the things to think about right off the bat is that you want to start thinking of it instead as a professional identity statement. Who are you as a professional? I know you're just a future professional now, but that's okay. You are a future professional and you're somebody who's thinking about what type of professional you want to go on to be. So your personal statement is going to contain a lot of information about that version of you and the professional person that you are becoming. So let's talk a little bit more about what this personal statement needs to contain. First of all, it's really basically kind of a 5-paragraph essay, right? So you're going to write an essay about who you are and why you're interested in going to graduate school, and specifically what interests you within the field that you're applying to. So if you're applying to clinical psychology doctoral programs, one of the things that you're definitely going to be thinking about is how your research and your clinical interests can be described in your personal statement. Very frequently, these research and clinical interests can be discussed while you're also talking about particular experiences that you have had as a student. So remember that these experiences that you want to talk about are academic experiences, volunteering in someone's lab, an important class that you took that taught you something meaningful, different experiences that are academic, not so much experiences that you take away from your personal life or from the mental health related problems that of course we've all encountered in family members or friends. Those are the things that are considered less relevant when you're actually applying to graduate school, and it's one of the reasons why I say we don't want to think about this as a personal statement. We want to think about it as a professional statement in that way. So as you're thinking about writing this professional statement, you want to think about what your theoretical orientation is. What theories, if you're going to become a psychologist, what theories are you interested in within psychology? Do you think of yourself as identifying with one or more philosophies or theories within psychology? And if so, why is that? Are there particular problems that are helped to be explained by those theoretical approaches? What is it that makes you drawn to that particular form of identification for you? Additionally, you want to think about what types of populations you're interested in working with or interested in studying. And you want to talk about that type of experience that you've had. Have you encountered people with these particular types of problems before? Have you had the opportunity to work with participants, perhaps, in a research study who are experiencing particular symptoms or were related to a particular clinical problem? These are the types of experiences that you'll be describing in your personal statement. Now, many students I've talked to are concerned about how to make their personal statement pop, how to make it sort of, interesting and attention-grabbing and that kind of thing. And I'll tell you, that is a really tricky thing. It's really difficult, right? Because, of course, the people who are going to be reading your personal statement are people who have read dozens of personal statements. I've read, hundreds at this point of personal statements. And so it does get to be a little bit difficult to kind of separate them all sometimes. However, instead of worrying about standing out, what you really want to do is make sure that your personal statement is in what I call the good category. You want your personal statement to be well written. You want it to flow. You want us to enjoy reading it. You don't want it to be boring, right? So you want to go ahead and vary your sentence structure. You want to go ahead and actually, think about the language that you're using, the voice that you're using in your language, the tone, so that it makes it more interesting, so that we actually enjoy reading it and there aren't a lot of grammatical errors or those kinds of things to kind of get in our way and prevent us from just understanding the material that you're giving us about yourself, right? So, very well written. The other thing that you really want to think about is that we can tell how many editions or iterations of a personal statement have been done. So I sometimes read personal statements that obviously needed more editing. And it's really important to go ahead and have somebody else look over your personal statement as you're going through the process. I think it's important to have one or two or maybe three people who are close advisors that you trust, preferably people who have seen a few personal statements, right? A faculty member, for example, who can give you some feedback on your personal statement iteratively so that you can write and then have that person look at something and give you feedback, both corrective and encouraging feedback about what that personal statement is reading like. Because I remember when I was writing this as a student, I just felt so clueless. I had never read any personal statements. I couldn't tell whether my personal statement was going in the right direction or whether it was something that somebody would just go like, oh, this is horrible, right? And so bear in mind that you might not know either, but that you can find people who have a lot more experience and that we can glance over and look at the personal statement to see how it's doing. Then, of course, make sure that you take the feedback. Now, when I say that, this does bring up one of those tricky bits. And when I say, you might want one or two or three people who look over it and tell you feedback about it, you don't want 5 or 6 or 7 or 8 people who look over it and give you feedback about it. Because part of what will happen is that then you just have too many cooks on your soup and you'll get conflicting advice and you'll be like, well, do I change this or do I not change this? And how do I change it back? And so remember that even though it's useful to get feedback from friends and from other people, acquaintances and so on that peers, it's most important to find a professor or two who would be willing to at least look at it one time for you and give you some feedback. Additionally, use other resources that are available to you. So the Writing Center here at UT, for example, is a great place to go to get iterative advice about a personal statement. Now, let's talk about this other element of a personal statement it's a little different for PhD programs and for master's programs. One question that people often ask is, how important is it that I kind of talk about clinical experiences? Have I had an internship? Have I had any kind of contact with people with clinically related difficulties or anything along that line? And this really depends on the type of program that you're applying to. So the more clinically focused the program, whether it's a doctoral program or a master's program, the more clinically focused it is and the less research focused it is, the more important it is to have some type of clinical information given in the personal statement. If you're applying to a doctoral program in clinical psychology, clinical experience is not necessary at all and is really not something that they even really need to hear about. However, there might be some other master's programs that focus much more on that. For example, at the sort of extreme of the other end, there could be professional master's programs that are actually suggesting that you need to have some type of professional experience before you enter the master's program. This type of master's program will ask for a specific type of essay for you to write that would include information about your professional clinical experiences. Right, so it's going to depend a little bit on the program that way. Now, another big distinction between master's programs and the personal statements for them and doctoral programs and the personal statements for the doctoral program in clinical psychology. Another big distinction is who's going to end up reading this thing. And how are you actually going to get into the program using this personal statement? Now, for doctoral programs in clinical psychology, it is crucially important that that 5th paragraph, the bottom paragraph of your little 5-paragraph essay there, that 5th paragraph is actually going to be different for every school that you apply to. So you're going to revise your personal statement for every school, right? Probably 15 schools or so that you need to apply to. Those schools are each going to receive a different version of your personal statement. Now, mostly you'll be able to leave it all the same, but that bottom paragraph is going to be changed for each school. And that's because that's the paragraph where you're going to tell them why their program is the best program for you. It's going to be the ideal program, and here's why, right? And why you're a great fit for them specifically, right? Not just for clinical psychology, not just in general for a particular field, but for that specific program, why you want to work there. This is going to include, for the doctoral programs, this is going to include naming specific researchers that you would like to work with who are on the faculty. So part of developing your personal statement is an iterative process that goes along with developing your list of schools. to which you're going to apply. Because of course, as you're developing your list of schools, you'll look over the list of faculty members and you'll identify people who share your research and clinical interests, people with whom you would be very interested in working with. And in that last paragraph, you're going to name those people. You're going to say, I would be very interested in working with Dr. So-and-so because of her work in this area and this area. And you're going to name probably 1, 2, or 3 professors at this particular program, depending on how many of them are well aligned with what your research and clinical interests are. So this means that in order to finish out writing your personal statement, you really have to know a lot about the particular places that you're going to be applying to. This does not mean that you need to wait to start writing your personal statement until you have your list of schools completely identified. If you do that, I think you'll probably paint yourself into a little bit of a corner in terms of timing. So you'll probably want to go ahead and start writing your personal statement while at the same time you're working on developing that list of schools and identifying which researchers you're going to be wanting to be mentored by when you're a doctoral student in clinical psychology. Now, if you're applying to master's programs, that last paragraph is also one that you're going to want mostly to update for the different programs. However, it is the case that master's programs usually admit people using a somewhat different system than doctoral programs usually use when they admit people. So doctoral programs, generally speaking, will actually use the information that you give them in that personal statement to decide who is going to read your application. Because if you name Dr. So-and-so, then they're going to actually say, oh, here's an application that needs to go to Dr. So-and-so. And they're going to go ahead and give that person your application to read. And then that person is going to decide, do I have funding for a student? Am I in the market for a student? And does this person really fit in terms of what I'm looking for? Would I like to make an offer to this student, to this applicant, for them to come and become my student? So that really means that when you're applying to these doctoral programs, you have to really have a targeted way of addressing these particular people, because they're the ones who are going to decide whether or not you're getting into the program. Whereas when you're applying to master's programs, it's much more commonly going to be a committee of people, and the applications are going to be divided up among those people, and they're going to be looking for a group of students who fit together and work well as a cohort for an entire program, as opposed to just individually attracting particular students and bringing them into the program. So this means that more people will probably read your personal statement, and that what they're really interested in terms of that bottom paragraph is information about their program, how the particular program suits what you're trying to do, and how your skills and abilities particularly fit well with that particular program that way. Right, so those are among the differences, of course, between applying to doctoral programs and applying to master's programs when it comes to the personal statement. But in general, you do want to make sure that you're emphasizing your professional experiences, especially your academic experiences, and that you're emphasizing your intellectual and academic student-related interests in the field to which you're applying. That's sort of the bottom line. Do lots of good iterations, lots of good editing, and breathe. Try to make sure that you relax and just kind of, give yourself a little room to be human, because it is a very anxiety-provoking thing to do. I still think to this day the personal statement is probably one of the hardest pieces of writing I've done, when of course, objectively speaking, by this point, I've written much more difficult things. But because it's about you and it's about your future, it's really tricky. So make sure that you treat it as a task that deserves a little bit of attention that way, that deserves a little care and a little concern, both toward you, of course, and toward the endeavor itself. All right, I hope that you'll check back in with us again soon for more tips from Grad School 101. This has been Dr. Bradbury.